We're in Lombardy East on the 8th of November 2019, interviewing Shanthie Tweedie, previously Naidoo. Cody van Wyk is our videographer, and I'm Karen Hurt. Thank you so much for this interview, Shanthie.
It's a pleasure.
We feel so privileged to and in awe of you. So we feel very happy and thrilled to be having this opportunity. Could we start by asking you something about your early life, where you were born, where you grew up, where you went to school, that kind of thing?
I'm the eldest of 5 siblings, and being the eldest, I was born in my paternal grandparents' home in Pretoria, and I was born in Pretoria on the 6th of March 1935, and my brother Indris is a year and 3 months younger than me, and my mother had difficulty coping with 2 small children. I believe one day I was sitting in the middle of this rocky street and cars were hooting. My mom couldn't cope, so my granny took me to Pretoria, and I stayed there until I was 16.
Okay.
Went to primary school in Pretoria.
Do you remember
in
the
Asiatic Bazaar.
Do you remember the name of the primary school?
It's a Pretoria Indian Primary School. There's nothing sort of.
And then the high school, were you also in Pretoria?
No, I didn't. I was, by that time I decided I've had enough of Pretoria. I wanted to come back and live with my parents. So I came back to Johannesburg and went to school at the Johannesburg Indian High School in Fordsburg.
And whereabouts in Joburg did you live as a teenager?
We lived in Doornfontein, and it's a rocky street. It's not the same rocky street that runs through Hillbrow. This one is in Doornfontein. It's a fairly short street,
And did you live in a block of flats?
No, we had a house. In fact, it's terraced houses. There were 5 houses sort of attached, and we lived in one of those houses.
Do those houses still exist?
Now they moved us away and smashed it because it was fairly old. It was. You could see it was beginning to decay. This red sand kept dripping from the walls and things like that.
What are your most vivid memories of apartheid and how it impacted on your day-to-day life and activities?
As a band person?
No, when you were younger.
I was brought up in Pretoria, primary school, and it was a separate school, and it was a Asiatic Bazaar, they called it.
Yeah.
And Pretoria, the apartheid was applied much more severely. Like an uncle of mine, it was quite late, and they were looking for a shop where they would buy fish and chips or something. They were hungry, and they managed to get him and beat him up so badly. In fact, somewhere we've got a picture of how badly he was beaten. So that sort of thing. And also you fairly go to the other parts of Pretoria, You can go to the shops. I remember my aunt went with her daughter to the shop, to one of these like Creightonmans or something like that. And she had her daughter with her. Daughter wanted to go to the loo. And she must have been about 4 or something like that. And they said, sorry, we don't have such thing for other nationalities. So my auntie said, well, you sit and you mess, do it here. Then we go home, and that's how, you know, life was more or less in Pretoria. I mean, they didn't consider whether the child needed to go to the toilet or not, you know.
Was there a moment that perhaps I know that you're from a very political household and family. Could you talk about that a little bit, how you grew up, the sort of values and thinking and vision of the people, your family? Could you talk about your mom and dad a little bit?
From a few generations back. My grandfather was a political man. He became very, very active, and he worked closely with Mahatma Gandhi, and you know, and he was quite well known.
Shanthie, may I ask you where your grandfather was? Was it Pretoria?
They lived in Johannesburg.
Okay.
But I mean, they came from my paternal grandparents came from Mauritius, you know, and somehow they you know, stayed for a while in Kimberley and came back to Johannesburg, and they stayed here. And he, you know, most of especially the Tamil-speaking Indians were sort of hawkery, and also some of the Hindustani people, you know, they weren't sort of what they did is buy fruits and things like that, go to house and sell it, and that's how they were being badly treated by the state, and not, you know, their goods are confiscated, and it wasn't very easy for people just to make a living. And my grandpa, although they had a business, you know, a forage business is like only a garage these days, you know, where you sell horse food and things like that. They had a forage shop in Fordsford.
And they were politically active?
Yeah, that's where he started his political activities.
Was there any particular organization that he was affiliated to?
They called it the Tamil Benefit Society at that stage, you know.
Okay. And then your parents were also political?
Well, my mother became political by virtue of marriage, you know, being married to my father, and that she herself was active, and she went to prison twice during the 1946 passive resistance and the 1952 defiance campaign. You know, she served a month each time.
And your father?
My father was arrested a few times, and he passed away in 1953. Yeah.
Was there? This is a difficult question, because you grew up sort of with politics in your life and with human rights kind of ethos and values. But was there a moment that you can remember and talk to us about when the injustice of the system made you feel compelled to do something about it?
Well, we're always doing something compelled. You know, every time something happens, we were outside the city hall steps demonstrating, you know, and sometimes a movement called us stay at home or something like that, and we were very involved in this sort of thing.
What kinds of things did you do, say, from being in your teenage years?
See, in Pretoria, I told you I was brought up in Pretoria, and although I used to come home very often, that in the family there you didn't get so involved politically, you know. But when you came to Joburg. But that's why when I came to live in Johannesburg, I became involved, And then my dad died in 1953. And, so Indris and I had to leave school and look after the family, provide an income.
What did you do as for your work to derive an income?
I worked actually. I did some odd jobs, like there was a firm that did clothes for theatres and things like that. I worked doing sort of sewing and things like that for a short while, and then I worked for the Congress of Democrats. And that is the right wing of the Congress movement.
What age were you around then?
Sort of 18, 19,
And could you talk about other members of your family? And we've spoken about your parents and grandparents a bit, but your siblings, their involvement?
Well, we were all sort of politically involved, and in fact, my sister, she's more or less about 10 years younger than me.
And her name?
She wanted to give out leaflets, wanted to join my brothers, and she went, and the police saw her and started chasing her, and she fell and he put a big boot on her, and we made a hell of a fuss of that. She was only 9 at that stage.
And her name?
Ramni.
Yeah. And do you recall what those pamphlets might have had written on them? What might it have been about?
I think I was in Pretoria at that stage. I don't know what that was. Prama was sort of got really, although we were active, Prama got very involved in the late 70s and 90s. And he was severely tortured, and he also gave evidence in the doctor, and there's also a trade unionist that died.
And was it Neil Agate?
Yeah, and the Neil Agate's trial, of his torture.
Okay. So they were there at the same time, were they?
They were detained the same time. And Murthy, he sort of was also politically active. He was arrested, detained twice. Once because he moved to Pretoria, and he was arrested in Pretoria. When earlier he went to actually go and see Indris, and he was flying to Cape Town. They were waiting for him at the airport.
Oh, because Indris was on Robben Island.
That's right.
More or less, when was that?
Indris was sentenced in 1964, I think.
Did you ever get to see him on the island?
Just before I left the country, I did.
Was there a person or people who had a particular effect on you during your time of political involvement? Were there any people who stood out for you in a kind of leadership or mentorship way?
Well, Dr. Dadu was one of them. He was the leader of the Indian community, the Transvaal Indian Congress. And he was an outstanding leader and always would look up to him.
And was there anybody else that you can...
sort of Moses Kutani and Walter
Sisulu.
Yes, and Nelson Mandela. In fact, these people were frequenting our house when we lived in Doornfontein because it was so central. They would arrange to meet a journalist there or a friend or something like that. And, Doornfontein was sort of quite central.
Yes. And was it quite a mixed racially, Doornfontein, at that time?
Earlier, yes, there were, lots of coloured communities, and these people were sort of like playwrights, they call them, and they sort of immigrated to Australia and places like that,
From the time you can remember, did you ever have a sense of being treated differently because you were a girl or a woman? Or did you have a sense of equality?
The boys always had more freedom.
Yes.
It did.
Do you think, did they have more freedom to come and go at different times?
Did you have
they
more
chores
never questioned.
to do? Right. But your family obviously encouraged your political activism.
Yeah, but we sat and talked, and there was, we all sort of didn't disagree.
Yeah. What year were you banned in? In what year were you banned?
In 60.
And
63. It's the same year Indres was arrested.
How long was your banning order for?
2 lots of 5.
They followed each other? So once your one expired?
Before it expired, they served the new banning order.
How did you feel when you got your second banning order?
Then I was feeling really frustrated. Ramni had already left on an exit permit, and because Isi left the country, her husband, and she actually did get a passport to go. They didn't know her real name, and 2 days before she was going to leave, they took her passport away. And then Pat Davidson, she was a lawyer and she was a close friend, so she immediately took Ramni to Pretoria and sorted an exit permit, and she left on an exit permit with 2 small children.
Sure.
So I thought, well, I should join her after I got the second banning order.
Yeah.
But there was a whole lot of other problems. They originally refused to give me an exit permit, but legally they're not allowed to refuse you an exit permit. As long as the country you're going to have accepted you.
And where did your sibling go to? Where did your sibling go to?
My sister?
Yeah.
In England.
Okay.
She was in England.
Could you...
London.
Do you remember what law you were banned under?
Suppression of communism.
And what were the conditions of your banning order? Did it include house arrest?
No, it didn't include house arrest. Communicating with other... Murthy my brother was also listed.
Okay.
So legally we weren't allowed, I wasn't allowed to communicate with him.
Were you staying in the same house at that time?
Yeah. We were living in the same house. And, although I was not house arrested, they often check on you. I had to report once a week to the JP police station.
Okay.
And couldn't be in a company of more than 2 other people, or something like that. And I was confined to the magisterial district of Johannesburg.
What were
you couldn't enter certain buildings that were educational institutions or trade unions or anything of the sort. And I had to leave work after my banning was served.
Where was that the Congress of Democrats that you were working
No,
with?
they were already banned by then.
Okay.
So I worked for SACTU, the trade union.
The South African
Congress of Trade Unions. Yeah.
And what did you do there?
I did clerical work for them. In fact, we also ran the organization during the state of emergency. The Congress of Democrats was closed during the state of emergency, after the shuffle.
Yes. And what kind of work did you do?
I did a general office work and things like that.
And then were you, did you have to stop doing that work once you were banned?
Well, Congress of Democrats was also banned and closed. I only worked 11 months at SACTU.
And so were you working at SACTU when you were banned?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I worked 11 months and I was served with banning orders.
Were you given any reasons for why you were banned? And
no reasons.
And why do you think you were banned?
Because of my political activities,
What do you think they hope to achieve by banning you?
Well, they're restricting you, I mean, you cannot be quoted by anybody. The newspapers cannot quote what you say or do. And, you became sort of a non-entity, really.
Yeah. And how did it feel? I'm sure you had different feelings during the time, but did you have any particular feelings at that time while being banned and so restricted?
Yeah, well, it's frustrating. It's very frustrating, and like even events when my brother got married, I couldn't go. My uncle died, I couldn't go. I mean, during that time, all sorts of family things happens, but you couldn't go. Restricted.
So, thinking about your political...
And also to report once a week to the JP police station.
You were talking about, did you get raided quite often, your family home?
Yes.
What time of the day or night would they generally
Well, they usually late at night or early morning.
And how did they come? Did they knock at the door?
Knock at the door, they had to knock, and just disrupted everything.
So it was just designed to destabilize the family.
Going through your books and everything. Your personal dignity is violated because you were sleeping and you cannot imagine how your privacy is violated.
Yeah. And how often would you say that happened, more or less?
It was difficult to say,
But it would be at least once a month, maybe.
Well, maybe, less.
What impact did the banning order have on your own personal life? I know the personal is political, but just for you growing up as a young person, on your ability to find work, on your personal relationships?
That was the difficult part, is finding work. I mean, Indres and I were the main person, looking after the family, and
yet you were both banned. Was Indres
wasn't banned.
Oh, Indres wasn't banned.
He was only house arrested after he was released.
Okay.
And by that time I was in England.
So how did you manage to make ends meet during such a difficult time? Would you just get short jobs or?
Get jobs and things like that. And Murti worked, my other brother worked, and between the three of us, and after Indres was arrested, Prama also eventually found a job in an engineering company, and that's how the family survived. And my mother used to do things, she knew some factory people and things like that, and they used to make petticoats and things. She used to sew, and she used to try and make some income.
Did she do that at home, or did she?
At home.
So it was kind of piecework at home.
Yeah.
And your leisure activities, were you able to do anything during that time of your banning? I mean, how did you manage
to have
difficult. Any leisure time?
It was difficult. But usually you go out with your family, you're living with and things like that, and it will be stupid of them to arrest you for being with your family.
Yes. During that your sort of earlier childhood and up to the time you're talking about, what did you think it would take to change South Africa at that time? If you can remember, the kinds of things you thought about and talked about with your comrades.
Well, we knew it's going to be a very difficult struggle, and we even thought that maybe the armed struggle will come in. We don't. But it was a bit scary. Even when Indres was doing things, we didn't know. The family didn't know.
And I mean, if you took yourself back to, say, being a 20-year-old, what kinds of things did you think about needed to change in South Africa generally, to do with obviously apartheid, but also other changes you wanted to see, maybe around working class struggles?
Well, we wanted to live where we wanted to, and also work for people, so that it shouldn't be difficult to find a job. I mean, it is difficult now anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I eventually, after 1964, when I was banned, I worked for Vanguard booksellers.
Right.
You know about?
Yes. Where were they located?
They were in Jubei Street, and
that Bromfontein?
Where Belfast was.
Yes.
And there was something in between. It was a building society in between, and then Vanguard. And they had a small section for children's books on top. And downstairs in the basement is where all the books were.
The sort of revolutionary texts.
I mean, there's no bookshop I know that was like that. Fanny Kleineman and Joe Mode really, and they were so supportive because I was detained while working there.
Yes.
Although I was a banned person, they couldn't intimidate her. She said they need to live. You can't do that. And Helen Joseph worked there at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. We worked at the same time.
And did you do a lot of reading during that time, being in a bookshop and?
Yeah, we did, but not too much because time was difficult.
Yeah. Was it a busy bookshop? Do you remember it being quite busy?
Sorry, it was a busy bookshop. It was very nice,
It sounds like the kind of bookshop people might have had meetings in.
I don't know about meetings, but because the place is always swarming with cops.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm. So the cops used to come into the bookshop as well?
Yeah, somebody used to come and sort of look around and see whether Helen and I are talking to each other or whatever. Yeah. Because both of us were banned.
Yes.
And we couldn't communicate with each other.
Sure. From that time of your first banning order, which you have spoken about already, and then you had the second banning order. What happened between then and now in your life? What kinds of things did you do?
Well, I must give you this whole story. You see, I applied to leave the country when the second banning came.
Which year was that?
68, I think. The second banning order. And
sorry, Shanthie, did they give you any reasons then about why they were banning you again?
No.
And was it the same conditions you were banned under?
Absolutely.
And do you remember the day when they brought that second banning order? Where were you when you...
In Doornfontein, we were living there.
They brought it home?
Yeah. And it was like overlapping, just before they give you a week or so.
And so from the beginning of that second banning order, could you take us back to that time and to the present?
Well, in fact, after we were talking to the family and they thought, well, if I want, because I felt very much to go and stay in England, and Ramni was already there with the 2 children. And, they didn't even have the British were taking their time, because you got to get permission whether they'll accept you to come into the country, because that's the first hurdle you have to go through, and then you get your exit permit. If a country accepts you legally, they're supposed to give you an exit permit. But the British took such a long time. I was detained in 69, June 69.
What were the reasons for your detention at that time? Because you were banned.
No, they just said they're detaining you under Terrorism Act. And they never give you reasons for anything they do.
And how long was that detention for?
I was in detention a year and a week.
In solitary confinement?
And I was detained, and then, I don't know if you want to hear that, saga of my detention details as well.
Only if you feel like talking about that.
Well, the first 2 weeks I was at the fort, and then they picked me up and took me to Compal building where the interrogation takes place. And they were sort of interrogating me. And eventually they said, well, you just have to stand, And I don't know how long I stood, but I know I went in on Monday, And they change every 4 hours, the interrogators. And different people. I'm sure you heard of Swanepoel and his scary methods, Now, by the end of that Friday, now I haven't slept from Monday.
You were in the same room for that whole period?
Yeah, with different interrogators and things like that. And I was actually hallucinating standing. And it was something about me flying on a plane and money and all sorts of things. Now, they also thought that there's something there about money coming in and things like that. They were going on at me when I sort of woke up. But then they realized, there was nothing there. They kept track of me. They didn't know. We couldn't. They knew I hadn't left the country or anything. You're still
right there.
Yeah, And that Friday, they gave me some solution to drink, and I slept on a camp bed, And when I got up, it was like the floor wasn't there. It was the most
freaky feeling.
Incredible freaky feeling.
Yeah.
And then they were interrogating me on about that silly dream I was hallucinating about. Then they let me go to a cell in Pretoria, and I was in solitary there. And on Monday they brought me back, and they went on about that dream and things like that. And finally they decided to leave me alone. And 6 months after I was detained, they took me to the synagogue where the trial of the 22 was taking place.
Where was the synagogue? Where was the synagogue?
Synagogue is Pretoria, that was converted into a court during the treason trial.
Right.
And that's where the trial of the 22 took place, because they don't have courts big enough to accommodate all these accused, So then they took me to court, and I was asked to give evidence, and I said, well, I don't think I want to. Actually, they asked the judge to, if I could be represented by a lawyer. And the judge said, okay, you write a letter to your family. And I knew my mother was, actually, for the first time she saw me. She didn't know where I was or what's happening to me. And when I got off the car with the police, she started running towards me. And, Durka, one of the police, was really horrible to her and chased her away, told her, we'll arrest you. And that was the only time my mother saw me, but she didn't know where I was. And there I got Jack Untitled, the family arranged for Jack Untitled to represent me. But the letter I wrote never got to my family, because the mother was in court, so the family knew, and they arranged for me to be represented. And I refused to give evidence. They gave me.
Is this which trial was that? Which trial was that?
Of the 22.
Okay.
And Jack Untitled represented me, and it's the first time I saw somebody that in 6 months, knows outside the prison. And, when I was sentenced, he also thought that I would be treated like an ordinary prisoner, which means you get letters and visits and things like that. But they didn't release me from the detention. I was still in detention. And I was in the same cell, excepting I had prison clothes for 2 months.
And then at the end of that period, at what point did you leave the country?
No, I was detained all in all, I was there for a year and a week. I was released in 1970.
Okay.
1970. June 1970. And then we also pursued this to leave the country, and we didn't hear from them when the lawyers threatened to take them to court. Then they said, okay, we'll give you an exit permit. By the way, this applying for exit permit, to going to court, was included Sobukwe.
Right, Robert Sobukwe.
Yeah. So, I thought it was a silly move to do both of us together because, you know, he was a leader of a movement, you know, and they wouldn't give him permission. But I wasn't significant enough, you know, and I should have been alone.
For that
test case,
process, yes.
And we could have won that but we went to the highest court and we lost it, you know. And then eventually said, well, we'll give you an exit permit, but I couldn't leave the Johannesburg district, magisterial district, to go to the port of departure. So that's where.
Yes, how did you overcome that?
Well, they didn't want to release me from my banning orders, you know. But there was a lot of pressure from anti-apartheid, Helen Suzman, you know, and all this pressure was growing. And eventually they said Pelser wanted to see me. So I went there and he said, when we said, see what happened was while we were in detention, there was this whole rugby thing in England where they couldn't even play the South African team because of the anti-apartheid movement there, you know, and they decided they'd rather keep you under banning than to send you abroad and create trouble for them.
Right.
You know. So because of all the pressures of the anti-apartheid movement from important people in Britain and Helen Suzman, you know, they said, okay, you can go. And I had to get an exit permit, and that's how I left.
And once you arrived in England, what kind of work did you do, or what were you involved in up to the time when you
did a short course, you know, in like typing and shorthand. But shorthand was very difficult when you, I mean, those days I didn't have a hearing aid either, you know. And you can't cope, your hearing is bad, you can't cope with shorthand, you know. And after a while I got a job at the International Defence and Aid Fund in their research department.
Okay.
And I worked there until we came home.
Oh, you were there all those many years?
Yeah, but there was a break in there because I went to, Dominic got a job. The ANC wanted him to help assist the African National Congress.
Tweedie.
You know, they have a school, they had a school for all the exile kids, because after 76 there was loads and loads of people flowing to Tanzania and things like that. The ANC actually opened up school with dormitories and houses for the teachers. I mean, it was actually quite a little beautiful city, you know. It was really nice.
And so you went there with Dominic?
No, he was there a year before me. And we came back together and lived in England. You know, and then I managed to get a job back at International Defence and Aid, you know. And that's what happened.
And what year did you return in to South Africa? 90. How did that feel for you?
You know what, you imagine what life was like in relationship with families and things like that. But by that time, brothers have got married and things like that. But Ramni and I were very close and always have been and still are, you know. But because of sister-in-laws and things like that, relationship hasn't always been smooth.
Yes,
you know,
kind of general family stuff.
Yeah, you know. And my mother actually was living with Pretoria with my cousin at that stage, you know.
Whereabouts?
In the Asiatic, in Lodium.
Okay. When did your mother return? Did your mother also go into exile?
No. Oh. She was living because, you know, the house they were living in Rocky Street was demolished.
Yes. And once you arrived, what was it like?
Well, it was exciting.
What did you do? Do you mind me asking how old you were when you arrived back?
Gosh, I'm 84 now, and I came back in 91.
Okay, we'll do
1990.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And where did you go straight to when you got back?
Well, our family were living in Leonesia, and we stayed with my brothers and their families.
Yeah.
Until we bought this house.
And were you involved in any political activity from that time?
Well, we still were members of the movement, and, you know, took part in whatever, because, you know, it wasn't all smooth sailing although we came back, you know. Also, we had to reapply. People who left on an exit permit, you actually forsake your citizenship.
So that was still in place when you came back? They hadn't disbanded that? I
had to reapply.
And was that smooth sailing?
Yeah, it wasn't difficult because there were some of these people, and the government people, they were very nice and they assisted us in going through all this.
Looking back on your past and knowing what you do now, are there things you might have done differently?
I doubt it, you know. I can't see how it could be different.
On the basis of all that you've told us and all that we haven't been able to cover about your life, do you have a message for the youth of South Africa today?
Continue the struggle, but continue it in a correct way. And, you know, extreme violence and all are not acceptable. You know, you don't destroy properties and things like that, but you continue the struggle.
If you were a young person now, what struggles do you think you might get involved in?
I think the same sort of thing, you know. I think ANC had a good policy and things like that, but that has gone wrong, and we need to rectify that. Just improve everything.
How would you go about doing that if you had the power to?
I think we do need to educate the people, and they must, you know, stand together and demand that. I think there is an attempt at the moment to try to, but they must work quicker on it. They're not doing it fast enough. And also work quicker to eradicate unemployment. You know, that is the biggest problem of housing for people. And make sure that people have food.
Shanthie, it's been absolutely wonderful spending this time with you. Thank you for giving your time for this project, and thank you so much.